This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. Welcome back to the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. My name's Pacienza, and I am rejoined by my good friend, Mat Staver, who is the founder and the chairman of the Liberty Counsel, and someone that we've had on the City of God podcast before. Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you. Good to be with you, as always.
Now, somebody who has committed their life and their career to defending religious liberty. Describe for our audience from your perspective, what is this cultural moment that we're living in as Christian Americans?
Well, Liberty Counsel, we have our 501c3, which is our legal organization, and our Liberty Counsel Action, our 501c4. So let me look at it from both perspectives. But from the legal standpoint, we have an incredible opportunity to advance religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and God's design for marriage and family. I think we have unprecedented opportunity to do that in our courts, and even going all the way up to the Supreme Court. So I think the next several years, the next 2, and certainly in the next 4 years, we have a great opportunity to select the right kind of cases that will change the landscape for generations. On the other hand, with regards to public policy, we have a great opportunity as well. We have an amazing opportunity to permanently change the culture for generations in a good way. The problem, however, that I think I see in talking with people in the public policy arena is they think that Donald Trump is doing everything and the executive orders are all that are needed. And those are great, as you know. And they set a baseline, which is wonderful, because now we know the president has a baseline on a wide variety of issues that advance America first and our Judeo-Christian values. The problem with only having executive orders, as you know, is that if you have another president 4 years down the road, we have nothing because that'll be all wiped out. So we need to translate those executive orders, and we have a great opportunity to do that, into legislation on both the federal and state levels. And we have momentum and opportunity that we've never, ever had, frankly, in our lifetime, to have broad, sweeping, lasting change.
An opportunity for unprecedented change.
Exactly.
So let's talk specifically about what Liberty Counsel's doing. Share with our audience some of the cases that you're dealing with right now, some of the wins and the victories that have been experienced as of late through your work and leadership and the leadership of Liberty Counsel.
Well, we have 2 cases that I'll just highlight. We've had a lot of cases at the United States Supreme Court since our founding in 1989. We've had 37 wins at the United States Supreme Court that we either briefed or argued at the High Court that have precedential value that will last literally for generations. We've overruled precedent that have been there for nearly 50 years. We've been part of the Roe versus Wade overruling, part of also the Lemon versus Kurtzman overruling that shredded and really hurt the First Amendment free speech, free exercise of religion and establishment clause. But 2 cases I want to highlight would be one, Kim Davis. Kim Davis goes back to 2015. She was the clerk in Kentucky after the Supreme Court's 5-4 opinion on same-sex marriage, quote unquote. And they went the wrong way. They invented it out of thin air. It's not in the Constitution. That happened on a Friday. She was challenged on the following Monday, and she chose to stand for her religious convictions and ask for a religious accommodation. She was sent to jail for 6 days for that. She ended up getting religious accommodation for her and all the clerks of Kentucky, both by executive order and by the legislature unanimously passing an accommodation. But then individuals came after her individually, personally, and they got a jury to award $100,000 against Kim Davis in her personal individual capacity, and then the judge tacked on another $260,000 for a total of $360,000 plus against Kim in her personal capacity for hurt feelings. They are claiming simply that their feelings were hurt because there was a delay in them getting the licenses. They wanted her name on it. They did get their licenses from someone else, but they wanted it from Kim, and they said their feelings were hurt because they didn't get it. And amazingly, a jury awarded that kind of damages. A jury awarded 0 damages. So there's a conflict in the juries, but this sets the case up for the Supreme Court. I just argued it at the Court of Appeals. We're arguing, number one, that religious freedom should have been front and center, as she requested. She should have gotten it. Everyone in the country should have religious accommodation when it conflicts with LGBTQ and their religious convictions. And also, and this is the key, that the 5-4 Obergefell decision should be overturned. And I think we have an opportunity to overturn that decision that shredded the idea of marriage to something that it was never meant to be. 3 of the justices in 2015 are no longer on the High Court. The Chief Justice gave a very strong dissent in that case, as did Alito and Thomas. So we have an opportunity to overturn
Now's the time.
Yeah, now's the time to overturn it. Another case is kind of the tip of the iceberg, if you will, between religious freedom and the LGBTQ agenda as it relates to churches and other Christian organizations, and it involves Liberty University. Liberty University hired a person by the name of Jonathan Zinski. 4 months before he applied, he was taking female hormones. And then he applied to Liberty University as an IT individual who would have interface with students, faculty, and staff. He signed off on the doctrinal statement that says, very specifically, God created us in His image, male and female, and that to identify as the opposite sex of your birth sex is a sin. Very specific. Signed off on that in agreement. Then he waits for the 90-day probation to expire, and he comes in and he says, I'm, quote, transitioning. I want to now be called Eleanor, and I'm taking these female hormones. They say, this conflicts with our Christian doctrine and statement, and he is terminated. The ACLU then files suit against Liberty University, and that case is being watched by a lot of people because it has a strong possibility of going eventually to the U.S. Supreme Court. If we lose this case, it's not just Liberty University, but it's any Christian organization or ministry. This individual came in, intentionally set up Liberty University to try to trump their Christian doctrine with this LGBTQ agenda. And Christian organizations and churches certainly have a right to be able to hire and retain or release employees that are consistent with or inconsistent with their doctrinal position. And if they can't do that, that destroys all Christian organizations. And that's why the ACLU got involved. This was a test case set up from the very beginning against one of the largest Christian universities in the country.
Wow. Matt, you talked earlier about the importance of executive orders, but that we can't put our ultimate hope in executive orders. We need legislation that can have generational effects and implications. In your opinion, what are the greatest threats to religious liberty right now in America? That if we just sit back and are complacent and we actually don't pray for and advance legislation, that we will pay fatal consequences for generations to come?
I think what we were just talking about is the LGBTQ agenda. It's a zero-sum game, meaning that there's a winner and a loser. There's no in-between. There's no compromise, no matter what the rhetoric might be from the LGBTQ side. It is attempting to solely and totally dominate anything that opposes or questions this radicalism of LGBTQ, whether it's the fact that you have what they want us to believe, 100-plus genders, or that men can be women and they can participate in women's sports, or that they can use women's facilities, or that they can come into your Christian ministry and force you to walk behind their agenda to the exclusion of and the suppression of your Christian values. That's, I think, the tip of the iceberg. And so we need legislation, obviously, to address that. We're seeing some of that legislation in the states, like about half of the states, for example, with respect to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries are passing legislation. Almost half have legislation to protect women and girls in sports. But the churches and the nonprofit Christian organizations, including Christian businesses that are owned and operated by Christians and run in a Christian manner, those are the target. They're being intentionally set up. And that, I think, is the culture war that we face.
Yeah, okay. I'm so glad you mentioned that. We have a lot of Christian executives that watch this podcast, and they're dealing with a whole host of issues, from woke HR departments to just employees that are threatening lawsuits. What's your word of counsel and advice to the Christian executive that's watching this episode, how they can protect their religious freedoms, their rights as a Christian executive, and don't have to bow down to the idols of our woke culture?
Well, I think Policies are very important for churches, nonprofits, and commercial organizations to have policies that reflect your Christian values. So, for example, whether it's a Christian-owned business, you can have a mission statement. You can have information in your policies about your Christian values. You can also address that with regards to your insurance coverage, that you're not going to cover abortion-inducing drugs or devices, or the so-called, mifepristone, the RU-486, or you're not going to cover hormones for opposite sex or surgeries like that. I think that's important to address and have that addressed in your policies as well. You can be more explicit as a church and nonprofit about your specific Christian doctrine. So it's not a matter of if you're going to get challenged, it's just a matter of when you're going to be challenged. So get ready. From an executive standpoint, I think you have to just really stand firm and stay the line. If you look at, for example, the shift that has happened with regards to the abandonment of DEI, and the wokeness of organizations. There was a time where Christian executives and companies were pressured by the Human Rights Campaign in Washington, D.C., the LGBTQ lobbying organization, and others, to fall in line with DEI and LGBTQ. And they were falling in line like dominoes. And for a Christian executive or a business, they were under a lot of pressure to fall in line. The fact is, I had people tell me, the train has already left the track and it's already gone. Horse is out of the barn. You can't return this. And I said, no, the pendulum will swing. Just stay the course, stay true to truth, and the pendulum will ultimately swing. They'll find out the bankruptcy of this ideology. And that's exactly, Rob, what we're seeing. The bankruptcy of this ideology is being exposed. And so now you have big corporations that were on the front lines going backwards and saying, no, actually, this is racism. This is discrimination. This is not good for their business. So stay the line and stay true to our biblical principles because they never change. Culture and popularity change from time to time, but once you stay true, you'll always be on the right side.
What's your counsel to the pastor? The pastor that's either ignorant to what he can and cannot say, or the pastor that knows what he should say but is operating out of fear and cowardice. What is the moment for the pastor in the 21st century to speak truth to power, particularly when it comes to preserving our rights?
If the pastor is still ignorant about what he can or cannot say, I would question, how serious that pastor is called to the ministry, because the information has been out there. The bottom line is, take off the muzzle and replace it with a megaphone. So don't be intimidated. That's the thing that pastors need to do. And pastors need to address, let me just take, for example, the sanctity of human life, abortion. Somebody says, well, I'm not going to address that because it's controversial. I don't want to be condemning. There's people in my congregation who may have had abortions. Exactly. That's why you need to address it, because you need to address it in a way that sets the standard of truth. And you can do it in a very nice way to show the amazing intricacy of the development of the baby from the moment of conception in the womb. Amazing how God's creation is actually knit together in our womb, and integrate scriptures. And then talk about that truth, and then open up the hands of Jesus to those that have had abortions. Because yes, there are people in your congregation that probably have had, or they may be thinking about it in the future. And if you don't speak up, two things happen. The chains of the abortion are still going to be wrapped around them. You need to let the captives go free, giving them the grace of Jesus Christ. And if you remain silent, someone in your congregation or somebody that they know in the congregation may ultimately take the life of their child because you were silent on it. And so we have to speak up.
Matt, we've certainly experienced an incredible generational win at the Supreme Court, as you know, with the overturn of Roe. We have an administration that recognizes life from the moment of conception, but this is not a time, as we've said multiple times on this episode, not to be complacent. What is next for the pro-life movement in America?
Well, in June of 2022, we all rejoiced because this 49, nearly 50-year-old terrible precedent of Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey were overturned. We rejoiced, but that was also a call to action. And since then, what we've seen is this effort to go to the individual states and pass state constitutional amendments. And unfortunately, the other side has been very successful at pushing that lie. And even in the last election, even though Donald Trump was elected president and a lot of good things happened in November of 2024, there's a number of states that passed constitutional amendments, even in a so-called conservative state. And now they have abortion in their constitution. Florida, where we live, was the first state to defeat that. And then South Dakota also defeated a similar amendment there. I think what we have to do, and in Florida, by the way, we defeated it, but they got 57% of the vote. The reason why we defeated it, in part, is because we have a 60% threshold. A lot of activity. We were very involved. I know you were involved. Many people were involved. Every voice counted. But 57%, we need to make abortion unthinkable. And so how can we do that? That issue is coming to every state. It's one of the most, if not the most important battle of our generations. And so the church, the pastors, need to be able to speak up to educate people about life and the importance and the beauty and the sanctity of human life created in the image of God. That's, I think, what we need to do, so that the next time, no matter how many hundreds of millions of dollars Planned Parenthood or others put into propaganda and lies, that we immediately have such a foundational platform within our communities that we reject that and say, no, we're choosing life because we know when life begins and how precious it is. That's, I think, our challenge. And that, Rob, you go back to what pastors should be saying, that's a message that needs to be incorporated, not just during election time, but throughout the year.
Amen. Final question, Matt. You've spent your calling and your career defending religious liberty. It's clear that your faith informs your calling. Describe for our audience what motivated you. How did your faith really inform your life's calling to do what you do today?
Abortion. I was a pastor, and I was one of those ignorant pastors you mentioned earlier. What about somebody who doesn't know? I didn't know. I didn't know about abortion because I just looked at the media and I just thought it was a high blob of cells, a menstrual cycle that was heavy. I didn't know it was a human being. It was in 1983, after I was pastoring, that two people decided to reach out to pastors with a film called Assignment Life back then. And it showed a first trimester abortion with a suction tube. And the baby went into that canister, and when it was attached to the suction tube, the canister jumped. And they then reassembled the baby body parts to make sure they got the whole baby. And when I saw that, Rob, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm a pastor. I know biblical languages. I know the Bible, but I don't know this. I felt like I was just hit over the forehead with a 2x4. And so I immersed myself into learning about the issue, and I realized how my faith, whether as a pastor or a Christian who's not a pastor, my faith has to impact and intersect with our culture in both law and policy. And I can't ignore one of the most important cultural issues that I was ignorant about in my own backyard. That's what ultimately propelled me to go into law school. It was that experience, seeing the reality of abortion. And so it's a very significant thing to me, because that was the trajectory that changed my career from the pastoral pulpit to the legal ministry.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your faithfulness and thank you for your calling. If somebody watching this episode wants to find out more about you and Liberty Counsel, where do they go?
They can go to Liberty Counsel's website. It's very simple, just two letters, lc.org, lc.org, lc.org. That's our Liberty Counsel website. Lots of information there, so be happy to get in contact with anybody. If you know any issues that are coming out in your community, let us know so we can get involved.
Appreciate you, Matt.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have today for the City of God podcast. If you are encouraged by this conversation with Mat Staver of the Liberty Counsel, we pray that you would pass it along to a family member or friend, anyone who's serious about thinking about how does our faith apply to all of life. And we pray that you'll come back and join us again right here at the City of God. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.